Welcome everyone to another episode of Movies After Midnight. We are kicking off, not kicking off, because I recorded in the past another episode that I'm definitely not going to record on my own after this. It's definitely already recorded. We are picking up part two of Mummy March Madness. And where we are talking today, I have Nick back with me. How's it going?
It's going.
And
Excited for the Brennaissance.
we are talking about the immortal 1999 classic film, The Mummy, directed by Stephen Sommers, starring Brendan Fraser and Rachel Weisz, among some other talented people. And yeah, I guess I should preface this, like, it's hard to be biased. Like, if I think I've talked about this on stream, but like literally when I was like transitioning, like, and choosing a new name for myself, literally the reason I picked Evelyn as a name is because I was inspired by this movie. So like that should tell you how like completely not attached and unbiased I am when it comes to the 1999 Mummy. Um,
This movie was a definitely big part of my childhood. Both of our childhoods. We watched this
Yeah.
movie whole bunch. Is some of the earliest stuff that I even remember ever watching was this.
yeah, well, I think part of it I think is because it's one of the first movies we ever had on DVD, and because of that, we watched a lot of the special features, and it was like one of the first movies I remember seeing and thinking about in terms of like the art of filmmaking, like that this was a thing people did and there was all this craft involved with it. So like I definitely feel like it was at least part of like my inspiration for like wanting to get into filmmaking.
Good place to start.
um so yeah, a little bit of history. So this is a Universal wanted to do a remake of the 1932 Mummy, and they actually went through some interesting directors before sort of arriving at Stephen Sommers and his vision for the film. They had at some point. It seems like like they had this idea that they wanted a horror film but didn't understand what they wanted, because they went to Clive Barker, and he had this pitch for a mummy film, and Universal was like, it's too dark and it's too violent, we don't want that. And he was like, okay, never mind then. And they went to,
Romero.
yeah,
Was
George
one.
George Romero was one who kind of had the same thing. Wes Craven, they offered it to him and he passed on it. And
He was busy with Scream at the time.
yeah. I should really watch Scream at some point. It's like an important
And then,
movie, I
I
guess.
can't remember his name, but the guy who did Gremlins and The Burbs.
Uh,
He was in him
yeah,
as well.
Joe Dante,
Dante.
which I could see because like especially with Gremlins, like he has this precedent of being able to like do a horror type story but make it fun and family friendly, which I think that's what they wanted, because we like there's this pattern of them going, they're being like, we want a horror movie, so we're gonna go to these horror directors, and then the horror directors like, here's a really dark horror movie, and they're like, that's not what we want though. So eventually,
one of the reasons
yeah.
that they didn't go with Dante was one of Joe Dante's things. He really wanted Daniel Day-Lewis to star in it, which would have put them over budget. They couldn't afford him.
Oh yeah, also Leo, right? You were
Yeah, supposedly DiCaprio and McConaughey were some of the people that were being eyed, and DiCaprio actually really wanted to do this movie so much that I can't remember the name of the film. It was some movie I'd never heard of, but he was working on another film at the time, and he tried to get them to like delay filming just a little bit so that he could do both movies, but
yeah,
unfortunately they didn't
he
allow
really
it, so
wanted to be part of this.
we almost had DiCaprio as Rick O'Connell.
That would have been
Weird.
that would have been interesting. I wonder how it would have changed like the trajectory of both their careers, because I feel like this is a very iconic movie for Brendan Fraser.
Yeah, We
Like,
would not have the Brennaissance were it not for this.
I mean, he definitely, like, he had some stuff under his belt, but this is the one that was kind of the rallying point, I feel like.
It's probably the thing that the most people saw him in.
Yeah. Yeah. But yeah, we ended up it ended up in the hands of Stephen Sommers, who at the time I think he had directed like one or two things. He was primarily a writer. He'd done the scripts for Huck Finn and the Jungle Book, I know.
Mm-hmm. He also did, I can't remember the name of that movie, but he did some action movie with like Patrick Stewart and some other people.
Yeah, yeah, I can't remember. It had the same name as another movie, and I was like, oh, he did that. Oh, never mind. But yeah, and talking about, I remember, we talked a little bit.
Gunmen was the movie.
Oh, okay.
And it was Christoph Lambert, Mario Van Peebles, and Patrick Stewart.
I always forget about Mario Van Peebles.
It was like the only even remotely action movie that Sommers had done. Before then, he just did like Huck Finn and stuff.
It'd be interesting to watch that and see if there was like a specific thing that like, because usually there's always that like one thing where they're like, okay, they did this. Mm-hmm. But yeah, he ended up with it. Watching the behind the scenes, and we talked about this during our Van Helsing review, because Van Helsing was a film that definitely, Van Helsing would not have been made if it weren't for the success of the Brendan Fraser Mummy movies, for sure. And in the Mummy behind the scenes, Stephen Sommers was talking about having grown up watching these Universal horror movies and like having a real, that might have been part of it too. It seemed like he was someone who was really into them. But he also, like, the line I always remember is he's like, the Mummy was the only one that actually scared the crap out of me. And like he really wanted to make the Mummy this like intense monster. Actually, I rewatched some of this behind the scenes stuff last night, and the thing they kept talking about was like, we don't want him to just be a guy in bandages, so they like really leaned into like the CG and the
so much
monster
so that
elements.
by the end of the movie, Arnold Vosloo is practically naked.
Yeah.
10 out of 10 would recommend.
Yeah, we don't want him in bandages, so we'll have him in nothing.
Mm-hmm. But he just over the course of the movie, he's like wearing less, except for at the start when he's literally a naked mummy.
Yeah.
But like he's wearing less and less and getting way more cocky and confident in his demeanor the entire time. Every time you see him, he's just got more Chad energy every single time.
That's he does have like the smuggest energy I think I've ever seen.
If there's one thing that Sommers is good at, a very smug villain.
He's just every time you come back to him, he's like,
Dracula and Imhotep are some of the best villains for that. Being very, very smooth, very cocky, very cool.
Yeah. Yeah, and honestly, I think characters are really kind of the strength of this movie, more so than anything else, because it takes, I think, as much from like Indiana Jones as it does from the Mummy, the original Mummy, and it does, like, it incorporates a lot of that adventure movie DNA, but pretty much every character you meet is a memorable one, even if they're kind of like the big characters. Kind of walking through the plot, like we start. There is having watched the original movie, like they definitely still play fast and loose with like Egyptian history and mythology, but there is like at least there's a little more of an attempt, I feel like, in this one to at least line up like Seti the First is an actual pharaoh that existed.
Mm-hmm. And they lined up the history in terms of when Seti the First was, and
also
lining it up with that remark that he makes later.
Yeah. Also, they kind of changed some things, because in the original film, really Oxana, they spell it differently in the new movie compared to the old movie. Like if you look at what her name is credited as. So I stumbled, but Anxunamun, the princess that he's in, not really princess. I think
she was the pharaoh's daughter, wasn't she?
No, she was his like consort.
She was an important chick.
Because Nefertiti is his daughter, and we get to her in the second movie. Um, uh, but yeah, in the original film, she was pretty much just a lady that like died, and like Imhotep's crime was really just trying to bring someone back from the dead. And in the original draft of this script, I have the Mummy Ultimate Edition DVD, and in the DVD-ROM features, you can find an original, the first draft of the script for this film, and like some of the things, there's a lot of stuff that changed in the course of making this film, and it's interesting because basically in both that and the original film, she was just kind of a hapless victim of like Imhotep's fixation on her. And in the final film, they make her a lot more complicit, where she is part of the murder of the pharaoh, and like so that's like this crime that they both share. And I think it makes her like a lot more compelling, especially like played by Patricia Velasquez. Like, considering how little she's in this movie, like she makes a solid impact in the like couple minutes that like Aung San Suu Kyi as a character actually shows up.
Because her character in a way is sort of like Imhotep's personal MacGuffin, but for that, she's way more memorable than just a convenient plot device should be.
Yeah. Well,
they
also
actually made her feel like a proper character, as to where she easily just could have been some random little side bit, but she's pretty important to the motives of the prime villain, and they make her feel important.
Yeah. Yeah, so we have this kind of introductory sequence where we get Imhotep doing all this, and like he's cursed to suffer this like horrible like thing where like any protection he would have had going into the afterlife is like taken away, and he's like cursed. And somehow of course the caveat of this curse is like if he were ever raised from the dead, then he would have like all the immortality and all these great powers, which we
some kind of logical thing, because he's severed from the finality of the afterlife. That means should he ever be brought back, because of that, he's now no longer tethered to the laws of regular mortality like everyone else. It's kind of the trade-off. So of course, hey, we're gonna take this really bad evil dude that we don't like, we're gonna kill him, but no one resurrect him, then he'd be even worse.
Yeah, well, I always felt like it was one of those things where, like, well, obviously we wrote very clearly not to resurrect him. Obviously no one's gonna be that stupid, right? They can read hieroglyphs. But then and he is buried in this Hamunaptra, this like city of the dead.
The city of the dead.
And it this narration by Oded Fair, who another solid actor in this movie.
Actually playing a Middle Eastern guy for once, and not playing another Latin dude. They had the Israeli actor playing an Egyptian. Not great, but at least they're bordering nations. He's not playing an Argentinian again.
They're getting closer. At least, like, especially compared to, like, the original movie, there's a lot fewer, like, white people playing Egyptians, so, like, even though they're not Egyptians playing Egyptians, like you said, it's not great, but it shows when the bar
step in the right direction.
When the bar is set so low, you know, you can
At least they got it, like, a South African dude and a Israeli dude, so like they're on the right continent.
Yeah, it's more or less.
They got that
far. So we were introduced to Brendan Fraser's Rick O'Connell and the
ever charming Benny Gabor.
I don't know how you would describe him in terms of character devices, but he's
Grease.
He's basically the film's token sniveling punk, and they're both serving time in the French Foreign Legion and like fighting this battle where everyone gets wiped out and Rick is the only survivor.
Rick and Benny escape.
Yeah,
but Benny closes the door on him.
Yeah, we don't realize that Benny is a survivor until and then we we cut ahead, we're introduced to uh, Evelyn Carnahan. I don't think we actually get her last name in the movie. I only know that because of the like credits. And her brother Jonathan, who pickpocketed some stuff off of Rick and was like, "Hey, I think I found something." And they basically seek. I mean, we're skipping a lot of stuff. You know, this is just the crash course, but yeah, they seek him out and they're like, "Hey, you can lead us to Hamunaptra." If and they like are able to like get him out of jail and go on this adventure. Which of course, as it happens, at the same time, they meet a band of cowboys from the U.S. who also have someone who has been to Hamunaptra, which turns out to be the one other person that survived that same battle. And actually, that's another thing in terms of like, there's a deleted scene where you literally like that shot where there's a shot where it like cuts from them getting Rick out of jail to him to them like looking for him as they're getting on the boat, and there's a shot before that where we see the boat and we see the cowboys and Benny like looking out over the dock, so like you get that reveal earlier, and they cut that scene out so that you don't actually see Benny until later on the dock when Rick manhandles him from the shadows, and it's like it's paced much better, but it's always interesting to see what was there and then got cut out. Yeah, and
their group comes. Both of those groups end up meeting on the ship, where eventually a group of these strange black-clad individuals end up attacking them.
Yeah, and we were talking about they're kind of referred to collectively as the Americans, which I mean they even play with that. Like there's a scene where they're like, if we can get there before those damn Yanks, and then they look at Rick and like, no offense, he's like, no taken, but the Americans, I really like them as characters because they're all kind of dicks, but you don't hate them by the end of things either.
They're not bad guys.
They're enjoyable characters.
Bad for them when bad stuff happens to them.
Yeah. And we also get again, yeah. There's so many good like character moments, I think, in this film.
One bit I was gonna mention that kind of came up on this boat scene a little bit before they have like this big gun battle stuff on that scene is the consistency of the firearms shown in this movie is actually a lot better than what I've seen in other films. We were breaking it down. From the very beginning, like they're pretty decent on choosing period accurate weapons to depict there, but in the first scene, well, not the first scene, but the scene towards the beginning, where Rick and Benny are in the French Foreign Legion in this battle. All the guns in that scene are like pretty accurate for the time, but all the guns that the French Foreign Legion dudes are carrying are like actual. They went out of their way to choose like actual French firearms and not just use the same guns that they're using for everyone else. They actually gave them specifically French ones, and the way that. And I won't get like super firearms nerd on this, just for the sake of time, but the way that the French Foreign Legion troops are firing their rifles is like accurate, because technically the rifle they're using is like magazine fed, but because it was complicated, it was easier to like load individually in a hot situation like that.
Yeah,
that's what all those guys are. They're single shot loading, single shot. As to where anyone who didn't do their history research would probably just say, oh yeah, they have these magazine-fed rifles, and just have them shoot like normal. Or if they wanted them specifically to fire one shot, they would have given them a different gun. But it shows that they actually did their research on that.
Yeah.
And then later on this scene on the boat, Rick and Evelyn are having a conversation while he's like unrolled his arsenal of weapons and dynamite, knives, and guns, and he's cleaning stuff and checking stuff out. And
Yeah.
the guns are completely consistent. Like
Yeah, he
revolvers
uses
that he has
like
there are the same ones he had at the start. All the weapons in there are all the guns that he uses throughout the movie. There's nothing in there that's his personal gun that's not shown briefly just in that role. Like they took the time to make all those props line up.
You were saying there was like a rifle that gets cut out, isn't there?
In the second movie, there's ammo for a rifle shown, but no rifle. But yeah, that's the second movie. In this one, completely accurate. Even the knives and stuff he uses, he has a regular knife, and then he also has like this balisong, and he uses that later.
Gotta have. It was the '90s. You gotta have a balisong.
But I was just so impressed with how consistent they were with that, because oftentimes when I'm watching any kind of action movie at all, I'm perusing the Internet Movie Firearms Database to try and identify stuff. And it's funny because you'll notice these inconsistencies throughout movies a lot of times where someone's using this type of gun, and then in the next scene they're using like a different variety, and it's little inconsistencies. This movie doesn't have many of those. None that can't logically be explained at all. Like, this movie took the accuracy and specifically the continuity of the guns really seriously.
Yeah, there's really good continuity
that I appreciate.
Yeah, talking about continuity. There are some moments where I guess talking about Imhotep too, like in terms of like I want to say there were some costuming moments too where like things made sense from like point to point, where like he loses something or he gains something, but it always kind of makes sense in terms of where he's at. But yeah, so like the first chunk of this movie is very like Indiana Jones adventure movie, where they're like trying to get to the tomb, and they're like, you know, they're fighting these guys who want to take the key from them. You get there's so many memorable lines. Like I'm part of a like Facebook meme group based on this mummy memes, and like there are so many like lines from this movie that are like, I think anyone who's watched it remembers them, and like because of that they're such prime meme fodder. Of course, probably the most remembered of those being the exchange that happens right after they leave the boat, where the Vinny's like, "Hey, we have all the horses," and Rick's like, "Yeah, you're on the wrong side of the river."
You're on the wrong side of the river.
And yeah,
Brendan Fraser's the best in this at like the reactions and responses.
Yeah, they're on.
Like his best deliveries are just like the simple responses to other people's stuff,
or not even
the energy.
Yeah, sometimes not even the responses. Like there are a few scenes where it's just you cut back to him like making a face, and like he sold the absolute crap out of it. Like cutting a head. Actually, there's a scene when like the mummy stuff really starts hitting the fan. He has this look on his face that like you just see so many gears turning in this character's head, where he's like, oh shoot, I knew stuff would be bad, but this is really screwed up. Jeez. Like it was just a really good like cutaway shot that I had never noticed before.
Would DiCaprio have done that? DiCaprio's good, but I don't think so.
Yeah.
Daniel Day-Lewis have
and of course
screamed back in the face of the mummy, making the same whoa sounds over and over.
Yeah, and we did kind of skip over Rachel Weisz as Evie, and John Hannah as Jonathan?
John Hannah's Jonathan.
Like both of them are also like, they have really good like sibling chemistry. I feel like where she's kind of the more responsible, scholarly one, and he's kind of all over the place. I actually I've read someone breaking down that like, when you think about the time this film took place in, the odds that Jonathan probably fought in World War I are pretty good. And like when you see some aspects of his character, like him drinking all the time, or him like, because he's a goofball, but he's never a coward. Like he like when stuff hits the fan, he's like there with a gun alongside everyone else.
He shoots back at people. He's never like, He's never any more scared than anyone else.
And like the World War I angle kind of, there are like parts of his character that are kind of funny, but like thinking about the context, it casts this light on them where like there's a part, yeah, you're like, oh gee, he's an alcoholic because he literally fought in one of the worst wars in human history.
There's a lot of World War I undertones in the movie,
because that's but like both, which again I think points to someone was doing their research really well, and they built up things that they didn't necessarily need to build up.
Those little, the extra mile on little things like that can really help. There's like that X factor that sometimes a really good movie has, or a cult classic or something has, that other movies just don't have, even though they might have the same budget, the same talent, acting, even good scripts and stuff like that. But there's this little extra mile that you can go on certain things that might not even be perceptible right away, but it's all like part of that recipe of doing a little bit extra each time.
Yeah.
Like whenever you dive into it, movies like this, you can tell they didn't cut corners. They weren't being sloppy or lazy with it. People were doing their research. While there may be inaccuracies here and there, yada yada, nothing's perfect, but they tried. They put a lot of effort in, and it shows.
Yeah. Also talking about the character of Evelyn, I think like she's actually not quite as active. Like again, watching the original film, they sort of split her character up. Because in the original film there was this lady character named Helen, who she was actually Imhotep's lost love, like reincarnated, and in this film they don't do that. So they sort of split her character up into Evelyn and Anck-su-namun. But like so like she's not quite as, I was surprised how active a character Helen was in the original film, where like she's being hypnotized by Imhotep through a lot of it, but like her attitude and responses to things are a lot more than just, oh gee, I'm scared. And so like as far as Evelyn's role in the story, like she's not the main action character, but she is like she is like kind of the driving force behind a lot of what's going on. And like I think she toes a good line where she's like, she's a fairly active character, but she doesn't necessarily, they didn't need to make her like an action heroine, because that's not who her character is. Like at the end of the day, she is a scholar, and like she like from like the start of the film to like figuring out kind of the curses and everything, like it's her as a scholar that kind of like always like gets them the one up over the Americans, or that gets
that eventually gives them that edge.
Gives them the edge over Imhotep. Which actually, and they even like they have that 90s kind of like inverted girl power moment where like the leader of the American expedition is like, oh, they're led by a woman, what could a woman know? And then cut to them finding this place that like everyone else is overlooked because she's like studied all this stuff and knows all this stuff. But yeah, like I mean, again, like obviously I took my name from her character, so like I I may be a little biased. Yeah. So yeah, moving ahead, like we get to Hamunaptra, and that's when the scary parts kind of kick in. We get man-eating scarabs, which as a kid, I kind of thought man-eating scarabs were going to be a much like more frequent concern in life than they turned out to be.
It's like quicksand, which was in this movie.
Yeah.
Like you learn about it and you're like, you think it's gonna be a more common thing, like you're just gonna be walking down the sidewalk and there's quicksand. It's like, oh yeah, I've got to be careful when I'm walking along and going to school. There might be a bunch of gold scarabs that burrow into my skin.
Yeah, you don't want that.
Well, that's how imprinting it was, because even though the CGI, and that's like a little side note that we could do, is
Yeah.
even though the CGI, especially on those scarabs, may not have aged to the best, doesn't look super real, the way that they utilized CG throughout this movie, except for like a few instances with the mummy himself, like usually it works pretty well, even though it's dated and doesn't necessarily hold up super well. They've used it tactfully, and it's mostly subdued or kind of subtle CG
it's
stuff.
it's not
That's
over
not the
overdone.
total focus of the scene. So that way, it's like, okay, maybe the CG doesn't look super real, but artistically, it still works.
Well,
so
that's
it conveys stuff just fine.
Actually, like the first shot of the movie, we were talking about that, where it does this big sweeping shot of like a sphinx, and they're like Thebes, whenever, and we were like, this is clearly a lot of it is CG because there's no way they would do that like as a set, but like it still looks really good and holds up really well.
And that's one of the cool things though about this movie is that kind of entry shot of like Egypt and when they have like the Sphinx and all of that is one of the only times that they CG'd anything in terms of like the landscape or the set. They did a lot of set building, a lot of really good in-depth set building on this movie. Like the I think it was in Morocco where they filmed most of it. And because they couldn't film in actual Egypt because of like weird government stuff, and even Morocco was a little sketchy at the time. It was like, I remember Sommers took out like kidnapping insurance on the actors. Just because it was a little sketch around then. But the set of Hamunaptra was actually like all of it physically constructed in a dormant volcano to give it kind of the dark, creepy look.
Oh dang!
Like that's the actual film location that they built the set in. So like they went hard on the sets, and I feel like that needs to be appreciated.
And they definitely nail like the atmosphere, which again I think is really like it's really cool how it turns from this like two-fisted adventure movie into this scary thing where like all of a sudden there's this mummy that is awoken and like like no mortal weapon can kill this creature, like that all of a sudden like all the rules that we've established until now are like, okay, that's out the window. He's just gonna start killing people now. And that's when we get introduced to Ardith Bey and the Magi, as we talked about before. Oded Fair. He's a character who when I think of this movie, I feel like he's in a lot more of it than he actually is.
It's just because of how impactful his scenes are.
Yeah, like he does a really good job with a relatively smaller role.
Which we'll get to it, but that's the thing I like about the second movie is I feel like he's in the second movie just a little bit more.
Yeah, definitely.
Especially as a friend, because at first in this movie there's some conflict of interest and he's trying to stop them, but once the mummy's awoken, then he kind of has to help them fight.
He is the Knuckles to Rick's Sonic.
And like Knuckles, he does not chuckle.
He'd rather flex his muscles.
Which Ardeth must have a lot of, because during one part, he rips a Lewis gun off of a plane and just like hip fires it like it's nothing.
Homeboy must be yoked.
Absolute beast.
Yeah.
Absolute unit.
So where are we? We get basically the Americans open this chest, and that's another thing they took directly from the 1932 movie, was it's this chest containing this Book of the Dead with these incantations to resurrect the dead. And
even though Evelyn must not read from the book, she does.
Yeah, but because they open the chest, it's like whoever opens the chest has to die. So they're like kind of marked that the resurrected mummy will hunt them. And so he starts kind of making his way through each of them, and that's where we get back to like the Americans were dicks, but they're good enough guys that you do feel bad when you see him take out each one. Especially the first guy, Mr. Burns. He's like this kind of he's like kind of the meeker, glasses wearing guy of the group, and like you feel really like he probably gets it the worst because he doesn't just die. He gets for some reason, and they don't really explain why. Imhotep only takes his tongue and his eyes at first, and leaves the rest of him.
Well, he got interrupted because he was in the process of harvesting him when Evelyn came across him.
Yeah, maybe. Like the way, it's framed is weird.
It was said later.
Yeah.
I want to say Benny and stuff was alluding to that.
Well,
he was interrupted. That's why he came back to him.
Well, the Magi Ardeth says something like, "We stopped him."
Yeah, it's like we saved him.
But yeah,
from getting more done.
But yeah, so he like loses his eyes and his tongue, and his friends have to like lead him around, and then Benny leads Imhotep to him to like finish the job, and you just feel so sorry for this poor guy.
Yeah. Which, not to pass over the scene where Benny first encounters the mummy, is a really good scene.
Oh yeah.
Because
again, it's really good character moment.
Because we've established already that Benny is this kind of really sleazy opportunist.
Yeah.
And I want to say in like the original, was it the original draft of the script or whatever that talked about that he had this dialogue with Rick at the start where he was talking about that he used to like rob altar boxes.
Yeah, well,
and
he
stuff
would
at, like, different religious
establishments. Yeah, well, he would pose as an altar boy, and then like steal the offering box when no one was looking. So he had this knowledge, like just enough knowledge of pretty much every world religion to pass himself off as someone who could get close enough to the money.
So whenever the mummy first encounters him, he's approaching him, and Benny's like grabbing all these different like necklaces that he has on that are like different symbols of world religions. He like grabs the cross and is like, "Oh Lord, protect me," and it doesn't work. Yeah. So then he grabs like the I think there's like a bunch of. I think he grabs like an Islamic symbol says something. The Buddhist symbol says something in like Chinese, I want to say.
Yeah.
And then he comes to the Star of David says something in Hebrew, which stops the mummy because he's like, the language of the slaves. I might have use for you.
Which is that
it actually lines up pretty well.
It lines up, but do you think that could be considered problematic by some?
Well, I mean, anything could be considered problematic by someone who wants something to be problematic. But I mean, historically speaking,
yeah, because
this is Imhotep who
yeah.
served under Seti I, who a lot of historians agree that Seti I was the pharaoh at the start of the Exodus story. So like the timeline lines up pretty well.
Because that was it's now that I think about it, that feels like
you should watch Prince of Egypt first.
Yeah, they're like the same story. Because that does feel like I talked about this with the original movie. There's a part where Imhotep hypnotizes a guy and presses him into service, and the reason he's able to hypnotize him is because they call him is the term Nubian problematic? It feels problematic. I don't know.
I mean, if it's someone who is from
he's
the
like
area of Nubia.
he's like basically he's a black guy, and because he's like descended from the Nubians, that's why Imhotep was able to hypnotize him in the 32 movie.
Yeah.
And so like this is way less of an oof than that was.
Yeah. At least this time it's not based on he has power over someone. It's just, so I'm speaking the language of the people who were the slaves during my time, so
honestly, I think that's Stephen Sommers definitely deserves credit for taking this story and making it something that like isn't nearly as like
I'm 12 and
well, that's not nearly as awkward to process, because especially when you get into like having like worked on some pulp adventure stories, like you do get into some difficult territory where you're like, I want to like depict these globe hopping characters, but I also don't want it to be like this story about like white characters just disrespecting a bunch of other cultures. And so it's a difficult line to walk, and I think Stephen Sommers did a pretty solid job of like turning working things into something with this movie, and that's
But at that point, jumping back to that arrangement with Benny, is he chooses to allow Benny as a mortal servant. And so Benny dedicates himself sort of reluctantly because it's his only way of surviving, but he serves Imhotep now and helps him do all manner of evil stuff, including track down Mr. Burns and finish the job stealing his soul.
Yeah, and then he kind of like he starts picking off the Americans one by one, uh, and regenerating a little more each time.
Yeah, he goes from a walking skeleton to a walking sort of skeleton with a little bit of flesh to a walking mostly flesh dude to a gorgeous South African.
The absolutely gorgeous face of Arnold
The
Vosloo.
absolutely gorgeously baby smooth head of Arnold Vosloo, who they, aside from his eyebrows, I'm not sure why they wanted it to be completely hairless for the character.
Yeah.
But they made him completely hairless, completely smooth. So
Yeah.
Vosloo was having to be shaved completely like 2 times a day during filming.
That'll put you in a monstrous mindset.
Yep. But he looked darn good, so it worked.
He did. Yeah. What were we even talking about?
That he recruits Benny, slowly becomes more powerful.
Okay,
Cat
yeah.
scares him.
Yeah, and like as he gains more power, he unleashes different plagues out of the 10 plagues of Egypt, which we talked about. It's weird that like the Egyptian gods would grant him power that's specifically based on like stuff the Hebrew god did. Like I don't like that's
In a way it makes a degree
mythologically
of sense,
that's an odd like mixing of.
in a way it makes a degree of sense though, because it's not like, again, armchairing here. It's not like the gods granted him power because his power was because he was cursed and cut off from the gods in the afterlife.
Yeah.
So like the fact that he now is tied to curses, therefore he is able to invoke the greatest curses ever made on Egypt.
Yeah, that's a good theory. I wonder who came up with that.
But I thought I was the one who said that.
But yeah,
that's just
like,
a theory.
again, like
a mummy theory. Cue the music.
He does have a channel called Film Theory, doesn't he?
I know that channel exists. I'm not sure if it's the same guy.
Because he has like a whole media. He just started Food Theory, where he goes specifically into like historical background of like fast food chains and items. But that's a whole other.
I have to check that out.
Yeah. And by just started, I mean like a year ago. My time perception is.
Theory channel, please sponsor.
Yeah. But yeah, what were we even talking? Yeah, they definitely play fast and loose. Yeah. Yeah, they definitely play fast and loose with like if you're someone who like understands Egyptian mythology at all. Like, well, even like Imhotep was a real person who was actually like pretty cool from what I remember. He was like.
I think that he made like several breakthroughs in medicine.
Well, he was like one of the greatest architects in the history of Egypt. I want to say like he built a bunch of stuff and like
mainly he contributed a lot. Was actually a good guy and did not receive.
He was like a really really solid cool guy, and for some reason like this is how he's like if we were living in the Fate universe, he would be so unhappy.
He gets to be played by Arnold Vosloo. What's to be unhappy about?
So yeah, they like he starts kind of gaining in power, and like they realize they'll have to stop him or else he's gonna be powerful enough to rule the world.
Because he starts mind controlling people in the city and all this. He has these horde of basically zombies.
Yeah, and again, that's actually a good character moment for Evelyn, because Rick's like, okay, we're out of here, we're leaving, going back to wherever else, we woke up a mummy, sorry, I'm out, and Evelyn's the one who's like, no, we need to stay behind and like do something about this, before people start getting picked off, and then they're like, okay, yeah, no, we definitely need to do something about this. And then all the water gets turned to blood, and that's a good. We get introduced to Winston, who's another good character who, despite being part of, I think technically, despite the fact that he's alive, he's still technically part of the Lost Generation, or like whatever came before the Greatest Generation, because like they're definitely the Greatest Generation is people who would have been born around like a little after this movie's happening, I think.
Not sure. All I know is
But
the
Winston
greatest
taps into the
generation. Who
Gen
do you
Z
think came
mindset.
up with that name?
Oh yeah, yeah, no. Yeah, but yeah, Winston taps into the Gen Z mindset hard because he's another character when you get into like sad World War I
By the way, Winston
stuff.
is a British
Yeah,
Royal Air Force pilot.
he's a RAF pilot who's basically like just really bummed that all his friends died in the war and he didn't.
And he kind of wants that chance to go out in a blaze of glory like his old comrades did.
Yeah,
And they afford him that chance by offering him the job to fly them over to where the mummy is.
yeah, and again, he's another character who like he's in the movie for like a few minutes at a time, but like makes a solid impact. Um, yeah, and then a lot of the movie is kind of again them slowly trying to like stop Imhotep from taking everyone's life force, which he does. They discover he is afraid of cats, which like as a kid that was always like that helped me feel secure at night. I was like, I'm scared of monsters, but we have a cat around, so I know I'm safe.
It's like Sleepwalkers, but
Yeah.
better.
I don't know how you could improve upon Stephen King's Sleepwalkers. That was a King thing, right?
It was one of the few things he did that wasn't based off a book. It was just designed for TV. It was like that one and The Dreamcatcher were some of the only things that he did that weren't books.
Huh. Dreamcatcher was good. I'll have to do an episode on Dreamcatchers at some point.
That would be a good episode.
But yeah, so making our way through the film, like we do, yeah.
Walking fast, facing fast enough.
Yeah, and then eventually Imhotep, like he basically he decides Evelyn is the one he's going to take and sacrifice so that he can bring Ankhsenamun back to life. And they kind of try to use her as bait, and that doesn't work, and like she ends up getting taken, and we have that. So there's another really like classic exchange where he's like Benny is translating for Imhotep, where Imhotep's like, and this is where like the first scene where we get him like fully regenerated into Arnold Vosloo, and he is just the smuggest, most pimpinest MF. Like,
because he comes out bare chest, but he's got this black robe that he used to be wrapped up in, and now it's just like flowing open, and he's just pimping through the crowd.
It's like he's like a wrestler walking to the ring, like
the robe and everything. Yeah, pretty much he comes out like he's Dwayne the Rock Johnson, foreshadowing.
Yeah, and he's like smugly delivering his ultimatum, and Benny's like, you can die or you can come with me and live forever, and she's like, it's for all eternity, you idiot. And like it's a good line, but like translating languages doesn't work like that, Evelyn. Don't be mean.
Those mean the same thing. The best part is like Benny seems so offended. Like,
yeah,
here's the thing: is like Rick throughout the movie like beats up Benny, and he gets scared of him when he beats him up and like roughs him up and stuff, and like makes threats. But like when he makes threats, usually Benny gets all cocky. But anytime Evelyn says anything bad to him, he just looks so hurt.
Yeah, well, because
like it carries more weight.
Yeah, well, when someone beats him up, he's like, "Yeah, you have your muscles, but I'm the smart guy. I have that over you." And Evelyn doesn't even let him have that. She's like, "I'm definitely smarter than you."
Because just the face that this guy makes whenever she says something to him, some great visual acting.
She does. Yeah, again, like really great reaction. What's his name? Kevin J. O'Connor, who plays Benny, is like he's an actor that does not get enough credit, because like he really like again like he sells everything so well, like from Benny being kind of a sleazy character to just the way he reacts to usually to Rick, but to kind of everyone. Like he does such a good job, and it's kind of a bummer that he like. It would be weird if they somehow brought back Benny to be in the second movie, but it is kind of a bummer that he wasn't there.
Because he did offer a really good, I mean, not a full comic relief, because there's comedy kind of throughout.
Yeah.
But he was kind of a good foil he was pretty much everything that Rick wasn't. Like,
Well,
Rick's a big, tough, burly action hero, and Benny's kind of the complete opposite. He's small, sniveling, and not even trustworthy in any way. But he's funny.
Like every RPG character I've ever rolled up.
Yeah. Except for Makoto was basically Ardeth.
Yeah. But yeah, that's the other thing. Rick, like Brendan Fraser's a pretty fit guy, but I don't think of him as this big, huge guy. But he
they made him seem really
he interacts with everyone like he's the freaking Hulk. He just kind of manhandles everybody.
Yeah, well, they did a really good job of having his character have that energy, despite. I mean, like, Fraser's tall. He's 6'3". He's the tallest actor there. Because even like, even Oded Fair and Arnold Vosloo are 6'2", I want to say. So he's got an inch on him, but they make him seem so just through sheer force of will and the way he acts. Yeah. He seems like you said, like he's the Incredible Hulk. Like,
he does inherit
more imposing than he should be.
It feels like he inherited the Reb Brown spirit of screaming in this film. He screams a lot.
Yeah, but focused and a little better.
I don't know if you could do better than Reb as far as like throat pounding screaming.
Brendan Fraser can.
Yeah. So yeah, we get to the finale. There's like the resurrection. There's there are some fight scenes, and I remember specifically
by this point, Ardeth is fully traveling with them and fighting alongside them at this point.
If you trace this movie out as though it were an RPG campaign, it feels like there was someone who like started off playing as one of the Americans. That character died. They then they're like, okay, well, you can play as one of the other guys. They go through the entire cast of Americans. And they're like, this Magi guy who showed up earlier, he's back. You can play as him, and that's like who he finishes the game as.
Everything's cooler once Ardeth becomes.
But like Ardeth is like, he is. Again, he doesn't show up for a lot of the film, but he's a stud for every moment he's on camera because he's the one who like takes the shotgun and like goes full like Dead Rising into that horde of.
Yeah, more Dead Rising because he was in one of those.
He wasn't. Oh yeah. Honestly, I liked him in that movie. I didn't like him as. He's not Carlos Oliveira, but he was a good character.
He's not Carlos, but he is Oded Fair, and I will take that.
Yeah.
Doesn't matter how you wrap him up. Give me Oded Fair, I'm happy.
Weird enough, I want to say the third Resident Evil movie was directed by Russell Mulcahy, who also directed the like second Scorpion King movie, which came out of this series. So we're all like joint at the. Give me a flow chart. Also, Russell Mulcahy was making his own Mummy movie around the same time that this came out, and boy, was that a trip.
Was that one of the ones that I watched, or?
No, it was one I was telling you about it. It has Sean Pertwee in it, and I can't remember. He played the evil guy in Cyborg. I can't remember his name.
Who are you talking about?
He was like the guy that Kurt Russell had to fight at the end. I can't remember that actor's name. Or Soldier, not Cyborg.
Oh yeah, also Sean Pertwee was in that as well.
Yeah, but that guy.
The bald dude.
Yeah, it's Russell. I think it's Russell Mulcahy's Tale of the Mummy. It's an interesting movie, but it's not strictly speaking very good.
Wasn't that the one where? Spoiler alert for anyone who wants to watch that movie. The mummy wins in the end.
Yeah. It was an interesting. Yeah, but we're getting way off topic. Yeah, where were we even?
This show is about movies you should watch. That one's not coming on you.
Well, I saw a Twitter post the other day. It was like, gay people be like, no, you don't understand, I'm obsessed, proceeds to show you the worst movie you've ever seen. And I'm like, how dare you straight up come for my entire brand as a human being.
I literally do a podcast based on that. Leave me alone.
Yeah. There are some fight scenes where Rick is fighting this, like, because Imhotep raises like his priests that served under him to like protect him while he's doing this ritual, and Rick has to fight his way through all of those with Jonathan and Ardeth. And there's some scenes where he's like fighting them like fisticuffs, and I want to say those scenes were not
sword swinging.
yeah, those scenes were not choreographed. They just kind of had Brendan Fraser go nuts against some imaginary mummies and then just CG'd everything in after the fact, which you get some really interesting, like there's a part where he like knocks one's head off, it catches its head and kind of juggles it, and he cocks back and like knocks the head. And I want to say that was one of those byproducts of like just
the fact that he paused for a
yeah
second.
he paused for, so they were like, why not, we'll throw this bit in. And like it's just that approach to it, like I feel like in the age of like heavily planned out CG Marvel fight scenes, that's not something you would see.
Because let me tell you what, that little scene right there, better than the final fight in Black Panther. That's all I'm saying.
Oof. There were some good things. Black Panther was pretty good, but the final fight kind of
Weak book.
But
Topic
yeah,
for another time. If what you were saying about that is true, where that it wasn't really fully choreographed, they just kind of had him go nuts and worked around.
like I want to say that was
really impressive how well it worked.
I want to say he described it because there's a commentary track that's literally just Brendan Fraser talking about working on it.
Yeah, you don't need
He had some fun stuff. Well, you again talking about how influential this movie was to me, because like as a kid I watched all these commentary tracks, because there's one with Stephen Sommers, the director. There's one with just Brendan Fraser being kind of a goof, and then there's one with I think Kevin J. O'Connor, who played Benny, Oded Fair, and who played Ardith, and Arnold Vosloo, who played Imhotep. And like getting all those kind of takes on the film was really interesting, because you get factoids like that. But yeah, like, and then we get the Sierra Madre Hotel ending, where
after they did you want to talk about kind of the actual twist, or not really twist, but at the ending,
but,
how,
I mean, we kind of talked about
like
how
half resurrect Aung San Suu Moon.
Yeah, he like
and then,
yeah, he has her half resurrected, and they find the book of the book of the live, or the book of life, the book of Amon Ra. Yeah. The
opposite of the Book of Death,
the Yang
Book of the Dead.
And it has these spells that can be used to defeat Imhotep. So they bring it in,
like,
and Jonathan can't read it, so Evelyn has to like yell instructions to him, and like that's what we were talking about, where it is.
Read, so like he can say the words, he doesn't know what they mean. So she's like,
which like you get,
for him.
which is another good character moment, because you get Evelyn and Jonathan are both well educated, but she was paying attention, and he was like drawing that weird S symbol on his homework probably. Like, and you get that vibe where they have the same base of knowledge, but his is a little like fuzzier,
broken. So it's like she's relaying translation instructions to him while he's trying to read from the book to remove Imhotep's power, while Aung San Suu Moon's mummy is attacking Evelyn, and while Rick and Ardeth are fighting these priest mummies that have cool swords and shields.
Yeah, they have
hop around and spider climb on the walls for some reason.
They have curved swords. But that
chariot comes, seals his soul away.
Yeah, but that's where we go back to, like, at the end it is like
it's the joint effort.
Oh yeah, for all these heroics, it is Evelyn's knowledge that's kind of like the missing piece of like everything.
Everyone there was an important process to it. It wasn't just at the very end it just comes out to slugging it out. Slugging it out was important enough to to make that gap of space for the smart people to do book stuff.
Yeah. Well, also it's just even when she's taken captive, Evelyn is not a damsel in distress. Like, she's actively contributing to her own rescue.
Like, she is in distress.
Like, even especially like when Winston dies, we kind of jumped back over that. Like, Imhotep has them in this dust tornado, and they're like gonna die, and she like remembers when he tried to kiss her before, and so she like kisses him enough to distract Imhotep from the spell and like give them a time to get out. But it's not like in terms of framing and everything, it's not this like sensual thing, and it's very clearly a moment of her understanding how things work and making this like strategic decision. And so like throughout that, like you get this aspect of her be like,
yeah, she's quick-witted, she's smart, and she's also not totally scared of everything.
Yeah, well, just
like,
she's
Benny's the only person in this movie who's ever scared of anything.
yeah. Yeah, but yeah, they're able to make they make Imhotep mortal, and this chariot like takes his soul away, which is like, I don't know.
That scene, for some reason, that scene of like the chariot coming down and stealing his soul away is like really memorable to me, especially when I was a kid. I thought that was so cool.
That was what I felt like when I first started hearing how Rise of Skywalker turned out.
Chariot comes, steals your soul away, and then Brendan Fraser stabs you in the stomach.
Yeah. Well, except in this case, it was more like
Rian Johnson or whoever.
J.J. Abrams, I guess, stabbing.
J.J. Abrams, modern Disney personified, also known as
that's
Satan.
Again, that's a whole other discussion to have. But yeah, so yeah, they defeat him and
he's dead.
Yeah, and Benny has been this whole time he's been trying to make it out with like treasure from Imhotep, the like treasure room, and
he's been, like dragging bags out one at a time.
Yeah, and he activates this self-destruct switch, which like why do they even have that?
It's just one of those many traps to protect Imhotep's remains and the treasure. Like,
but they
all over the place.
But so then they have to get out of there, and they lose Benny.
Crumbling.
And like you do get that moment where the door is like closing, and Rick does try to go back. That's a consistent.
He tries to save Benny, even though Benny would not have done the same for him.
Yeah, which you get that even at the start. There's a dude a random like extra who gets eaten by the scarabs, and you see Rick like he's turned around ready to go back for the guy, but he sees he can't do anything. So like. I like that they keep that consistent. Like he's always the guy who will turn around for someone else.
Because at first he doesn't seem like it. He seems like totally cavalier, self-serving.
Yeah, another Rick from a '40s movie who stuck his neck out for no one comes to mind. But yeah,
Rick Springfield.
Well, yeah, little Casablanca baseball.
Rick Dalton.
Rick Dalton.
Heavy.
Yeah. Hey. But yeah. So yeah, they make it out, and everything's kind of wrapped up with a nice little bow on the end.
And Jonathan makes this remark about like, here we go, we finished empty-handed again, and Rick makes a little comment about, I wouldn't say so, and him and Evelyn face, and he's all like, whatever. Then they get on the camels to ride away, and you realize these were the camels that Benny had been loading his treasure onto. So they're filthy freaking rich.
Yeah, well, also in the end, it's Benny that secured their financial future. So how's that for a karmic bit?
Benny got the bag, but not for himself.
Yeah.
You can chase the bag, but you can never catch it.
In ancient Egypt, bag chases you.
Whenever the bag is a flesh-eating scarab that looks like a gold jewel, golden-crusted jewel, and you peel it off and it climbs into your skin. We totally just didn't even mention that guy.
Well, yeah. Oh, yeah.
The scene with the camel chase inconsistency. Did you want
to yeah. There's a scene where, so like they established that Benny's guys have all the horses. Like in that iconic line.
Was on the wrong side of the river.
Yeah, and so there's this bit where you see Rick and Jonathan are getting some camels, and then Evelyn comes out and they gave her this, I don't know, some get up where she's like all fancy, and Rick's like, oh heck, but like, so they established that like our protagonists are riding camels, and there's this part where they're like betting each other against the Americans, like whoever makes it to Hamunaptra first.
Again, like right outside Hamunaptra.
And so they have this race, and like right before that, there's this line where Benny's like, "Oh, nice camel," and so there's this race where they're like racing towards Hamunaptra, and during the race, all of a sudden, Benny is riding a camel when it was very explicitly established a minute ago that he was not on a camel. And I can't remember. I
I
need
think
to
it was
find.
the warden or whatever
Yeah, I
it
can't
was.
that actor's name because he's a guy who shows up in a lot of stuff that
Yeah,
played
and
the
I can
warden,
never remember that dude's name.
like a lot of things. But that so yeah, he's the guy who had Rick in prison initially. Is like he comes along on this venture because they promise him a portion of the like proceeds that they make from it, and he's the first one to die. He finds these scarab jewels, and like a scarab comes out and like eats him, and that's
Okay.
like I think that was when we got that reaction shot where Rick is like, "Oh shoot." Um, but I noticed he was not. You never see him during this racing sequence. So like my head canon is that there's some lost piece of footage where like Benny like action hijacked the camel from him.
Omid
For this.
Jalili is that actor's name.
Okay, what's his like
He
background?
was
Because he might be he might be the most accurately cast person in this movie,
well, I mean technically he's
possibly.
British,
Okay.
but
You know what? I
he's
think I've seen.
mixed.
Yeah, I want to say a
He
lot of the
was
stuff I've seen him in have been like those modern like crime and spy thriller type
he was
movies.
also the slave trader in Gladiator,
Oh yeah,
playing almost the same character.
yeah, Spaniard.
Yeah.
Uh,
Also Eric Avari.
oh yeah, who?
He
Uh,
was the one who found out that he actually was part of the Magi early, and that's why he tried to stop Evelyn and Jonathan from getting the map.
oh okay.
Which, not to sleep on Eric Avari, because he's one of those guys who, yet another Brendan
Yeah.
Fraser movie that he was in. He shows up as like he's a good like character actor, kind of
Yeah.
supporting role.
That
He
guy,
shows
yeah.
up in a lot of stuff, and he's good in all of it. He
The
was
yeah, the
in
head
Mr.
librarian.
Deeds as well. He was funny in all those.
Yeah, he's
He's
anot's
solid
like yeah.
for
There's a
every
lot of
set,
good character actors in this.
I really liked him in this one because he wasn't just a comedic character. Like he sacrificed himself so that the rest of them could escape against Imhotep's mind-controlled masses. Like he draws a sword and it's just like, go save yourselves, and just starts cutting people
Yeah.
down and dies fighting. Like he's a respectable.
Yeah, he dies the
character.
studs. Yeah, because he's a magi and he like he goes down like a magi.
Yeah. Which it's sometimes easy to forget those supporting characters whenever you're recapping the movie.
Yeah,
But those are some of the bits that made the movie so good along the way. There's a lot of really good characters, really good side characters. It's a very character-driven movie for
Yeah.
a action horror-ish
yeah. Well,
movie.
I think
very
that's
character-driven.
yeah. Well, I think that's the strength of this because like if we're looking at it comparing it to a lot of like action blockbuster movies that came out at the time, like it's in terms of story, it's fairly by the numbers. Like the mummy aspect is cool. But like I think what really the reason that like people still talk about this movie today is the characters and the performances. I think if I were to pick out the one thing that's really like worth watching this movie for. And like
Definitely a whole lot of
'cause, yeah,
fun.
it's
and,
not yeah.
really good acting across the board.
Yeah, because it's a really like acting driven movie, but not in the way that like a Kenneth Branagh movie or something is, but like it is very like if any like we were talking about like if Leo were in this movie, if literally any one piece of the cast were different, it would change the entire energy of the film because it's so character driven and cast driven.
Mm. Yeah, you recast any character, get rid of any side character, suddenly it's not, the recipe's messed up. It's no longer nearly as good. Like each person is so important to the not just like the narrative, but the overall feel to it. Like it's the energy that it has, that
Yeah.
kind of good balance between a little dark and scary, but not like very much. A lot of good action, but a lot of comedy that's not overblown. Like the whole movie's, it's really good example of like one of those balancing acts.
Yeah, they don't
where
make them
it's
like that no
juggling
more.
a lot of different things, and it just to keep them all in check the whole way through.
Yeah.
very easily, like, if I was trying to make this movie, I would not have nearly, even if I had all the same everything available to me. Like, there's a lot of instances where they've perfectly balanced a lot of these things that I know, like, I know I couldn't do that. It's very impressive.
Yeah.
Just that they were able to, story-wise, put so much work into it that you don't even realize that they've gone the extra mile every time they've had the opportunity to.
Yeah.
If any of that made sense.
Yeah, no, I was following. I just like I don't think we have any. I was trying to think of anything else to add. Like, we've gone on for like an hour and 10 minutes about this movie.
And it's a good thing that Imhotep has been taken care of, because that'd be really bad if he came back.
Yeah, I mean.
Do not want the mummy to return.
I mean, what would happen? Like, why would someone bring him back? What would be something so frightening that you would need Imhotep to fight it?
Poor CGI Dwayne Johnson. That is pretty terrifying.
The rock lobster. But we'll get into that next time. Yeah, I'll see you guys. See you guys next time. I'll be, I'll be uploading. Trying to do this fairly consistently, at least with the Mummy movies. So yeah, we'll see you next week with the Mummy Returns.
See you then.
Deuces.
And we're totally doing that next week and not in like 30 minutes.
Yeah, no, it'll we'll have like a whole week.
Yeah, so you already recorded the original Mummy review.
Yeah, I definitely still don't have to do that later.
Just like we're not also just about to watch and review.
Yeah,
Returns.
we just like wearing the same outfits several days in a row. You know, that's.
You know, I should just change my shirt or
Yeah,
something. Like wear a different necklace. You can throw on like a jacket or something. Like try and look different. Like let your hair down. Go, oh, this is a different day.
Yeah, but yeah, we'll see you guys next time.